In 1997, a tragedy unfolded in a quiet corner of San Diego, California, leaving behind more questions than answers. The bodies of 39 people dressed in identical outfits were found in a luxurious mansion. An eerie message was found at the scene proclaiming, "We leave this world to reach the true reality." The men were members of a group known as the Gates of Heaven, a cult whose beliefs challenged the conventional understanding of the world. They believed that everything around them was just an illusion, a difficult ordeal that preceded a higher existence. News, history, personal feelings, all of it, they believed, was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep them trapped. Such views may seem extravagant, but history shows that this is not the first time humanity has questioned the nature of reality. Long before the San Diego tragedy, ancient Hindu texts spoke of Maya, the great illusion that envelops humanity, causing it to mistake the transient for the eternal. Yet you don't have to turn to ancient philosophy or esoteric cults to sense that something is wrong. Almost every person at certain moments of life experiences a strange sense of déjà vu, a feeling as if what is happening has already been predestined. Coincidences seem too perfect, and patterns repeat themselves with the compulsiveness of a poorly written script. A stranger suddenly finishes a phrase that the man has just begun to utter. The radio starts playing the song he just thought of. Suddenly, a vivid memory of an event that those around the person claim never happened pops up. What are these? Mere coincidences or a hint of something greater that lurks beyond our perception? At first, it can be written off as a mere coincidence, but the more you delve into the matter, the more ominous the picture becomes. And here begins the most interesting thing, because what if we assume that all our knowledge, memories, beliefs, and even perception of the surrounding reality is not as real as we think? Memories may be subject to change, feelings may be deceptive, and our entire understanding of life may be just an illusion. Modern science has already proven that reality can change depending on how we observe it. In the famous two-slit experiment, physicists found that elementary particles behave differently depending on whether they are observed. This means that the very act of perception has an effect on the physical world. It's worth considering for a moment. If reality were as immutable as we used to believe, why should it change just because someone is looking at it? This suggests that absolutely everything we experience, from our visual perception of the world to the passage of time, is not something constant. It is all influenced, shaped, and even manipulated by some higher power in our own perception. So what happens when our perception of reality fails? What if our whole life, with all its beliefs and feelings, is just a skillfully created illusion designed to deceive our senses and hide the true picture of the world? The warning signs are already making themselves known, like harbingers of change to come. Indeed, reality is what we take for granted, trusting our feelings, thoughts, and memories to shape our view of the world. But what if they are all just clever deceivers leading us down the wrong path? And this is not just a bold hypothesis, but a very real phenomenon that happens to us all the time. Take our memories, for example. We tend to think of them as immutable records of the past, but in reality, they are more like fragile glass that can easily be distorted, reshaped, and even completely remade. A prime example of this is a psychological experiment called Loss at the Mall. In this study, scientists told participants 4 stories from their childhood, 3 of which were true and 1 of which was completely fictional. The story of getting lost in a mall at a young age. At first, the vast majority of those involved flatly denied the very fact of the incident. However, a few days later, something truly sinister unfolded. Their memories began to awaken. Moreover, they were not just blurred fragments of memories, but vivid, detailed pictures. They described the specific store they were near at that moment, vividly conveying the sense of panic that had gripped them, and even the subsequent relief at realizing that they had been found. But here's the paradox. The event never happened in reality. Their brains had been subtly manipulated to create a completely false memory that nevertheless felt like an authentic, real experience. This raises a legitimate question. If memories are so easily distorted and manipulated, how much trust can we have in what we remember at all? And that, as they say, is just the tip of the iceberg. All of our perception of the world around us passes through a very complex filter called the brain, making it highly subjective and unreliable. We see colors even though they don't exist in objective reality. Colors are just electromagnetic waves of different wavelengths that the brain interprets as red or blue. We feel the passage of time, but time, as it turns out, is not the constant we used to think it was. Albert Einstein proved conclusively that time can be curved and slowed down depending on the gravitational field and the speed of the observer. Human perception is deceptive. The brain tends to smooth out irregularities, forming the illusion of stability and predictability of the world around us. However, the most surprising thing is that the brain is programmed to ignore certain aspects of reality. There is such a phenomenon as inattention blindness. In one experiment, a group of volunteers were asked to watch a videotape of a basketball game and count the number of passes of the ball between players. Paradoxically, many of the participants failed to notice a man in a gorilla suit who walked across the court quite openly, without lurking, during the game. Amazingly, about half of the subjects simply did not see the gorilla. Their brains filtered out that image because their attention was focused on another task. Thus, the reality that appeared before their eyes ignored the obvious fact. If the brain is able to completely erase from perception the huge gorilla walking around the stage, what else could it be hiding? What other details escape attention? And most importantly, who or what determines what a person sees and what goes unnoticed? The truth is that reality is not what it appears to be at first glance. It is a skillfully created illusion that only pretends to be genuine, skillfully concealing from man what is really happening. However, the first signs of breaking are already making themselves known, and there is a question of readiness to recognize them. One is immersed daily in the routine of making decisions, forming personal views, and navigating life circumstances, firmly believing that the mind is inviolable territory and thoughts originate from some inner source of self-awareness. But has there ever been a question about the true origin of those very thoughts? Not in the abstract philosophical sense, but in the most direct sense. What was the impetus for this or that thought that had just arisen in the mind? Was it really an independent generation of the mind, or merely a reaction to external stimuli? Every idea a person holds, every belief he or she espouses, every preference he or she considers an inalienable right, upon closer examination reveals a complex web of influences that were not consciously chosen. Cultural traits, environment, literature read, overheard conversations, and even the background noise of society all subtly penetrate the mind, shaping one's perception of the world, often going unnoticed. And the paradox is that thoughts arise in the mind so naturally and effortlessly that there is rarely a need to investigate their original source. Imagine if thoughts emerge from the hidden corners of your mind, but a closer look reveals something disturbing. Your reflections may not be as individualized as they seem at first glance. It is likely that the decisions you make are nothing more than programmed reactions to impressions learned over time. Perhaps even the aspects of your values, likes, and dislikes, and even your sense of self that you ardently defend. Your values, likes, and dislikes, and even your sense of self are not a reflection of a deeper inner truth, but merely an echo of repetition. And if this is indeed the case, then what does it mean to be yourself? Have you ever wondered what proportion of your reality is borrowed? Not stolen or imposed, but imperceptibly absorbed, like water permeating a sponge. You were born into a world that already lived by its own laws, into systems, traditions, and beliefs that existed long before your first breath. You didn't choose them, they were simply inherited, and yet at some point you began to truly believe that they were your own. Think about something as simple as your name. Often the innermost things, the things that seem integral to identity, are not really the result of conscious choice. These elements of identity are formed long before one gains the capacity for meaningful perception. All of life is spent in a continuous reaction to these set parameters, in the process of identifying oneself with them. A natural question arises. If a person were called by a different name from birth, would he or she feel different? This thought can be extrapolated far beyond just a name. The language a person speaks, the way they think, their value system, none of this is a personal invention. These components of identity are inculcated into the mind through years of exposure, repetition, and reinforcement. This raises a troubling question. If every belief, every fear, every preference has been implanted from the outside, then what is left of the authentic self? Modern neurobiological research has revealed a startling fact about the decision-making process. It turns out that when a person believes he or she is making a conscious choice, his or her brain has already made a decision milliseconds before that realization reaches consciousness. In other words, the thoughts that arise in one's head, the opinions one holds, the actions one takes, originate not where one is used to thinking. The human mind is continuously engaged in complex processing of incoming signals, resulting in the formation of a subjective perception of reality before the individual has time to critically reflect on what is happening. This process resembles a pre-prepared scenario, which is mistaken for a manifestation of free will. An illusion of control over the situation is created, while actions are largely dictated by subconscious attitudes. This raises a legitimate question. Which part of the personality is genuine? If thoughts arise spontaneously, ahead of conscious deliberation, and identity is shaped by factors not subject to conscious choice, what or who actually controls behavior? Let's imagine a hypothetical situation. A sudden awakening without the slightest memory of the past, without a name or formed identity, just pure, unclouded awareness. In this state, a person opens his eyes and begins to cognize the world with a clean slate, unencumbered by the burden of past experience, established beliefs, fears, and expectations. The question arises, would he or she still be himself or herself under these circumstances? This thought experiment raises the fundamental problem of self-identity. It is commonly believed that there is a fixed self, an unchanging core of personality, but reality shows a different picture. The human personality is a complex structure formed from memories, lived experiences, and internalized attitudes, which together define our I at the current moment in time. It is noteworthy that scientific research shows practically all cells of the human body are renewed within 7 to 10 years. This means that the physical body that existed a decade ago no longer exists in its former form. Skin, internal organs, and even brain cells undergo gradual replacement. This raises a legitimate question. If the physical shell is constantly being renewed and thoughts are subject to continuous change, what remains the same? Consider, for example, the beliefs a person holds at a given time. It is very likely that 5 years ago he would not have shared those beliefs, and 5 years from now he may not agree with his current self. Thus, if beliefs, thoughts, and even the physical body are not constants, what is the essence of the human personality? This question becomes even more intriguing in light of cases in which people with dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, have one personality exhibiting a strong allergic reaction while the other personality does not. Imagine for a moment the following picture. 2 completely identical bodies, but one suffers from skin rashes while the other remains intact. This phenomenon clearly demonstrates that the influence of the mind extends far beyond mere psychology. It demonstrates conclusively that the mind actively shapes not only our thoughts, but also the very fabric of the reality we perceive. Assuming that the reality of each of us is subject to constant change and shaped by the mind, a legitimate question arises. Who then is the observer of this ongoing process? What if our true self lies not in the thoughts we ponder, but in the pure awareness that merely observes their emergence? What if we are not our beliefs, our past, or even our name, but something much more fundamental, something that cannot be changed, named, or defined? Realizing this fact can radically change our perception of ourselves and the world around us. Let's delve into this question even further. In neurobiology, there is a concept known as the theory of predictive intelligence that can completely overturn our view of ourselves. According to this theory, the brain is not a passive receiver of information from the outside world, but is actively involved in its creation. At the moment, when we look around, we tend to assume that we see the world as it really is. But what if this is not true? The human mind, like a skillful seer, anticipates the course of events before they actually occur. Relying on the treasure trove of past experience, established patterns, and personal expectations, the brain creates a complete picture of the world long before the senses have time to confirm it. In other words, what we used to think of as objective reality is really just a carefully calibrated hypothesis that the brain constructs on the basis of existing beliefs and perceptions. This striking fact explains why two people, having witnessed the same event, can perceive it completely differently while experiencing diametrically opposed emotions. A person whose childhood was spent in an atmosphere of fear and anxiety will tend to see threat in any situation, while someone who grew up in love and care will notice kindness and compassion in the same circumstances. This is why a piece of music that previously evoked no emotion may, years later, suddenly touch the heart, causing a storm of emotion. The reality that surrounds us is not something objective and unchanging, but rather a personal illusion skillfully woven by our brains. And the amazing thing is that we are never meant to see the true reality, because the filters of our mind will inevitably shape our perception, subjectively shaping everything we see and feel. If the human mind is capable of shaping reality before we even have a chance to experience it, then a legitimate question arises. Who is really in control? Who is the architect of our subjective reality? Every fleeting reflection, every spontaneous reaction, every deeply held belief that one holds dear is nothing but an echo of bygone days that has a determining effect on the perception of the present. A legitimate question arises. Do people really make their own choices? Or do they merely play out a carefully scripted scenario woven from years of experience, conventions, and unconscious assumptions? This perspective may seem daunting at first, but in reality it offers a sense of freedom and limitless possibilities. After all, if reality is just a complex construct, it means that one has the power to transform it at will. As a vivid illustration, we can cite the results of a neurobiological experiment in which participants were asked to describe the color blue. The intrigue was that in some cultures, the very concept of blue is absent. For representatives of these cultures, this shade is simply a kind of green, and the most striking thing is that they are literally unable to distinguish the color blue. Their brains do not register its presence. This example clearly demonstrates that something as simple as a word can predetermine the boundaries of perceived reality. If language, cultural traditions, the past, and emotional background shape perception, what part of a person's life really belongs to him? How much of his thoughts and actions are the result of his own unconditioned choices? The truth is that reality is not a given that man passively perceives, but a complex construct created by his mind. In this case, life experience is not just a series of events that happen to a person, but the result of his own creativity. But the question arises, who is this creator, this you that shapes reality? If thoughts can predetermine the perception of the world, what is behind those thoughts? And most importantly, is it possible to awaken from this illusion before the moment of no return? As we continue to delve into this question, it is worth thinking about free will. If everything a person experiences is shaped by his mind before he is even conscious, how free is he in his decisions? Man lives his life with the certainty that he makes choices, controls his thoughts, decisions, and actions. However, modern neurobiological research questions this certainty and offers a look at shocking facts. In one experiment, scientists hooked subjects up to brain scanners and asked them to press a button at will. It seemed simple, but the results were striking. The brain scanner recorded activity that preceded a person's conscious decision-making. Surprisingly, decisions are made by the brain a fraction of a second before a person realizes them. It's worth pondering this fact. It turns out that even before the thought of a choice is formed in the consciousness, the brain has already made its choice. This leads to the conclusion that the consciousness, the very part that considers itself to be the main controller, is in fact only a storyteller who, after the fact, comes up with explanations for the decisions made. A legitimate question arises. Is man really in control of his life? Or is his mind simply executing a program formed by years of habits, conditioning, and subconscious biases? This question becomes even more relevant if we consider that living on autopilot raises the question, who then lives this life? Most people, unfortunately, never ask themselves this question. They go with the flow, reacting to circumstances and believing that they are making a conscious choice. They do not realize that they are caught in a vicious circle of conditioned reactions, habits, and programmed thoughts. But the good news is that the cycle can be broken. The key to freeing yourself from the illusion is to see it for what it really is. At the very moment when a person begins to closely follow the flow of his thoughts, not just blindly trusting them, but observing them from the outside, the shaky outlines of the illusory reality begin to appear before his eyes. He notices repetitive patterns of thinking, recognizes how ingrained habits creep into his consciousness, catches his mind trying to rationalize actions that it has already been programmed to do without asking for his consent. And the more intimate this observation becomes, the deeper the awakening becomes. It is akin to coming out of a deep sleep and realizing that one has never really slept. This is why ancient spiritual teachings, be it Buddhism or Stoicism, invariably emphasize mindfulness over blind control. Awareness is paramount because the moment one becomes aware of something, it loses its power over them. This is the key. Thoughts will continue to arise in the mind. The mind will continue to run its well-oiled programs. But if the individual is able to step back and simply observe this process instead of getting lost in the mental noise, he will regain his lost power. Not by forceful change, not by vain attempts to curb the mind, but by simply realizing its true nature. As soon as the veil falls from the eyes and a person realizes the illusory nature of what is happening, there is no turning back, and the worldview undergoes irreversible changes. However, a natural question arises. Is it possible to finally awaken from the obsession, or will the mind, like a pendulum, return to the usual lies? If an individual has reached this point of awareness, he or she is already ahead above the majority of people who have fallen into slumber. But it is important to realize that knowledge and the actual living of that knowledge are two completely different planes of being. Therefore, if the viewer is ready to face the truth and see the world unvarnished, he is invited to join in further exploration. The truth is not somewhere beyond the horizon. It is here and now. You just have to reach out and tear away the veil of light.